speaker, Professor Akbar from Turkey. I'm very happy and honored to have you here in Milan, and it is a real pleasure to assist and lead and see this that would be for sure a fantastic presentation. And thank you for accepting this invitation, and I leave the floor to him, and I hope you will enjoy this presentation. Thank you for coming. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, and I hope I will learn from you. This work was published in '86, and it finished in '84. Can you imagine? '84. Now, in the last 5 years, people started to look at it. So what I'll present today is those days' work, and then after that I worked on the same issues but on economical level, which I'll present tomorrow. Let's first start with this video. If you look closely again, you will see that there is the guards here watching and looking. The guards here, and there is this wire. We don't know who decided to give them the permission to do that wire, and then somebody intervening to take the wire up so the damage will be eliminated. Then the damage happens. Then they are arguing about it. So who is responsible? This is a major question. Who is responsible about what's happening in the built environment? Is it the people on the site or the people outside the site? Let's take these examples. You see, these are people using the outside part of their property to exhibit their products. Now, whether we like it as planners, as city, municipality, workers, or whatever, whether we like it or not, it will happen. Simply because the people are always there on site. No matter how much rules, penalties we make, they will make lobbying, they will go back to the authority, they will change the rules. They will violate the rules. This is in Venice. I was yesterday at this time in Venice. This is in Venice. You see, they're taking part of that. Of course, they have to pay fees or something as a rent for the authorities, through corruption and so on and so forth. So there is always this possibility, depending on the honesty of the officials and so on. How do you do that? They are always inside. Now, sometimes we see the damage like this clearly. This is, for example, in Turkey, somebody exhibiting things outside. In the traditional environment in the Middle East, people exhibiting things outside. That some type of damage in our perception now as planners happens in the site. Now, my argument is the following. With modernity, with invention, with new technologies, cities are becoming better and better in terms of utilization and so forth. Everybody thought, or most people thought, that the reason for this progress is planning and decision-making process. And gradually more and more decisions are being centralized and taken by the professionals on the expense of the people in the site. So we are camouflaged, we are fooled by the advancement of technology, of paving roads, of making big gardens, with all these technical advancement, we are fooled, we think, because of its planning. My argument is no. We could have done much better with these new technologies if we gave the people more power to decide. The people lost power on their fate, on their sides. So the machine that produces good knowledge was somehow stopped. Let me show you this small video. This is in Venice yesterday. Watch the dress of the lady, how the air is moving. Show it to you again. Watch the dress with the airflow. This is again in Venice. So this amazing morphology in which the air flows and transforming outside space as a living space for the people can never, I think, be made by central planning. These qualities of life can only come from experiencing the site of the people living in the site. And this is my argument, that with the development of new technologies, we pushed everything and we thought that it is made by planning. This is my major argument. So traditional wisdom was not referred to in decision-making process. Now, with the new ideas of technology and theories of planning and so on, planners, architects, when they look at the beauty of the traditional environment and they want to produce something similar, they look at the end product usually. They don't look at the process, how those beauties were generated. And that's happening, for example, in the Middle East, where you have humans' rights, property rights, patterns of ownership, and all these issues that generated these, that I call the mechanisms, generated this type of environment that we like. The new or contemporary planners, architects, theoreticians, they copy these elements, which is the end product, and reproduce it again. This is Hafsiya project in Tunis, won an Aga Khan award. And you can see he's copying the overpass and using it again. So rather than looking at the process, they look at the product and they copy the product. They make filter. This pattern pass, this pattern does not pass. Now, I think we as professionals, if we want to improve the built environment, we need a theory. And I don't claim that this theory I'm presenting or this method of understanding the built environment is the theory. What I'm saying that we have to look at the process more than the product, because if those processes generated better environments, maybe if we followed them, improved them, we will have much better environments. And I used in that book, Crisis in the Built Environment, the word crisis, because you know Thomas Kuhn in his famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, he argued that there is paradigms and there is anomalies and there is crisis, and we are ready to introduce new paradigms. That's why I call the book Crisis, because we have crisis in the field. Really, we have crisis. I'm a student of John Habraken. He is from the Netherlands, and if you know his work, in the 60s he was talking about control and dominance, And he makes clear distinction between control and dominance. Control means peoples, individuals, institutions control objects, control spaces. Dominance is a relationship between individuals, between the state and the municipality and the property owners, and so on. I learned this from John Habraken, and that was my beginning in understanding the built environment. For example, he argues, John Habraken, that we can never see control in the built environment if we don't see change. And because usually architects and planners are not interested in observing the built environment for a long time, they don't see change well, and they don't deal with change. What do I mean by change? For example, this building was small one, this was added to it, then now this is the new building. This is in Tangier. This was, I think, 100 years ago. I went back to the same site. You see, there is major differences here. This building appeared, this building changed, and landscaping of the area changed. John Habraken argues that when you see two players playing chess, you will not understand anything if you don't know the game. But if you observe long enough, you start understanding the rules of the game. Now there is rules of the game in the built environment that we often don't understand. We can only understand that if we understand or observe long enough to see how objects change. Then we know who is powerful, who is in control. Then we can deal with the built environment, whether we are planners or architects. If we don't understand the built environment from a perspective of change and control and dominance, maybe our proposals will not be as good as if we understand the built environment as a process through change. So understanding change clears the environment for us as a process. When we understand the process, we can intervene in a more logical, acceptable methods. What happened in the traditional environment or the traditional fabric or tissue, that professionals introduced terms for it, like decentralized, like organic, like traditional, meaning that it is something in the past and maybe let's forget about it, maybe we'll look at it and so on. My argument, no, that's not true. Each environment has its own unique character. They are not all the same. And I'll give one example from the traditional Muslim environment, in which there is one tradition said by the Prophet, which is a rule, that when you give your tax, you cannot give it as a cash. You have to give the tax as object. You produce cows, your tax is cows. You produce olive, your tax is olive. These days you produce airplanes, your tax is airplanes. This made moving objects difficult, because you can always transfer cash, but you cannot transfer cows, it's difficult. So this means that the poor people in other places, they are drawn into the places where there is objects as a tax, the poor people, so they can take it. The existence of objects as a tax, zakah, means that this area of this part of the world have potentiality to absorb more working hands in this produced object as a tax. So if the tax is olive, and it is in Jordan, let's say it's olive, it means that somebody from Sudan may come to Jordan to take the tax as olive, which means he's unemployed there and he will come to this area to be employed again. So this means that always settlements are on the locations that are the richest possible. Now, of course, if you look at the traditional environment everywhere, streets are irregular, streets or property outlines are not square, but it could be a fabric of nobles who slave other people, like in Europe in the Middle Ages. But is that quality environment high? Yes, it's high when we see it, but on the expense of utilizing other people, poor people. So we're mixing here now the quality of the built environment with the quality of life of all people. So the term organic fabric, decentralized fabric, traditional fabric is not the same everywhere. That's why we lack in our profession the wiser understanding of the traditional environment. So that's my argument. Let me take one example to make my point. That was my first argument. My second argument is that the built environment is so complicated for planners to understand. I argue always no planner can understand the built environment. And if he understands it, maybe for 1-2 years, what would happen in the next 3 years? Then he will make the wrong intervention. If you like, I'm trying to argue that we need different role for planners. Let's take the trees, one object, the trees as an example. Let's imagine that there is a town and they had, it's composed of 50 houses, and they had, let's say, 100 trees as a gift from somewhere, from nature, from friends, from other state or whatever. The possibilities of distributing the tree are various, so let's take 3 possibilities. The first possibility is that they are placed in the center of the city and in the main streets, or inside the private properties, or both. What are the consequences of each decision? Now, if you notice in the Middle Eastern cities that most trees, if not all trees, are planted inside the private properties, not in the outside. This is Safranbol in Turkey, this is from Northern Africa. Again, you see the streets has no trees, the trees are always inside the private properties. Here in Tunis, the French planted, here is in North Africa, Baskara, I guess, inside the properties. Now, what does it mean? If we place the plants inside the properties, the people who take care of the plants, their knowledge will increase over time when they deal with the plants. If it's planted on the major streets, the people will have no knowledge of growing trees. But we need somebody to take care of those trees in terms of irrigation. So we need to tax the people to take care of the trees. You see, we have 2 different impacts in terms of knowledge. The same goes with social interaction. If the trees, or let's say palm trees, planted inside the houses, the man may spend more time with his family. If it's outside in the streets, maybe the man goes outside and he spends more time with his friends. Maybe the ladies go outside and sit under those trees and there is cafe and so on. So the type of interaction where the trees bring the people together is different. Now I give the tree as an example because I came from a culture that has no trees. The tree is very valuable. And maybe you will laugh, you say, what is this, trees? Trees are everywhere. For you it's another element, I don't know what is it. Okay? Economically, maintaining the trees won't cost much because the maintenance is distributed in the house owners. But if it's in the middle of the street, it will cost the city because an authority has to do that. Now I took one example. The more you think of the scenarios of how the distribution of the elements in the society will have consequences, social, economical, and so on. And if you think at the built environment, it's not only a tree. It's the light columns in the street, it's the sidewalks, it's the hospitals, it's the schools, you will become almost crazy. Because you cannot understand the consequences of placing those elements and how we tax the people or give it to the people to take care of it or. Now, the location of the elements has much to do with the people's initiative. If the tree is in your own property, you will take care of it more than if it was somewhere in the central plaza of the town and that's your tree, or maybe that's the government tree. And that's very, very obvious. Just look at the police car everywhere and compare it with your own car, especially if you are poor. If you bought a new car, you watch it day and night. But if it's the government car with you, you don't care much. My good example always, I don't know how it works here, but in third world countries, is the police car. In few months, they are just like garbage. They drink tea in it, they spill tea, coffee in it, and so on. And then they take the car to maintenance to change the oil. The guy who changed the oil does not change the oil, he sells the oil somewhere else and claims he changed the oil, and in few months it is broken. Now this is an example of what I say, that the people's initiative is much linked to the location of the element and whether they like it, they own it or not. Here, for example, the authority decided to plant some trees, and although there is trees from the past, as if it does not exist. They made new bidding for new trees, and they have these trees, then they made a contract with another company to irrigate the trees. Now this guy doesn't care whether the tree live or die, because the contract asks him to irrigate, and to do it fast. Look what he's using.
Are you in Italy? No.
No. But I noticed in Italy, in the hotels, you don't have when you wash in the washing basin, the water is not mixed with air. So I said they must have so much water. So there. Anyhow, then the tree will die because it will be uprooted. This is in a mosque. Supposedly the mosque prayer leader is an honest man. Still, he's human. This rag with the prayer moves, because when the people pray it moves. So he nailed it to the ground. These guys, this is in Tunis, they're maintaining the street, so they decided to make tea. So they are lighting this fire. Although it will damage the flower pot, but that's not their business. They want to drink tea. This guy is in Egypt repainting a window panel. He does not clean the window before from the previous painting. He just repaint. And he does not repaint everything. This is in my university. They decided to move the furniture from one building to another. They just put all the chairs, all the expensive things on top of each other. They're damaged, not damaged, that's not their business. Their business is to move the objects from one place to another. That is their contract. So if you look at the society like this, everything is based on contracts with defined responsibility from someone, and they are paid for it. Other things for them doesn't matter. I always give this example to explain the importance of process versus product. Let's say that in the traditional environment, the dead in the street legally is owned by the people who live around it. Now, if the people living in that street are Muslims, they may pray 24 hours. If they are not Muslims, let's say young guys who are looking for ultra-modern life, they may dance in it 24 hours. For the built environment, does it make difference, praying or dancing? What matters, who take care of the street and how they will take care of it. If that street was taken care of by the government, it will give the responsibility of taking care of the street to a company that might do well, may not do well, and then they have to tax the people for that. But if the people own the street, and that is their responsibility to take care of it, they have to maintain it, they have to clean it. Gradually, conventions will develop how to take care of that street without much expense. So what I argue about that the patterns of responsibility does not know religion, does not know culture. It is based in basic human tendencies. There is basic human tendencies, whether the person from India or from Argentina. People like to improve their environments. People like to own more things. People avoid interventions of others and so on. So there is basic human tendencies that if we understood, we can improve the quality of the built environment. This is in Sweden. I was there 2 months ago. I gave a lecture and the temperature was -12 and we were freezing in the room. And I told the manager that, listen, does it make sense to have a heater close from the top? The air should flow. And there was an opening here in the window that's bringing cold air. Please put some silicone or something to close it. We are freezing. They said, okay, but nothing happened for 3 days. Because maybe the manager of the hotel is not the owner. Whether they lose electricity or not, they don't care. But if he was the owner, he won't wait. He will rush to close the opening so he won't lose much electricity to save money. These are examples and other examples to show the basic human tendencies of people. Here is a guy who's building a stair for nowhere that in the future he will add an extension. This is a guy who managed to somehow corrupt the authorities because the people in the site, the residents of the site, has no control. So he can take part of the street. Can you imagine there was an arch here? He took half the street. The street is already narrow. He took half of it. This is an extension of a dwelling to a dead end street. He took part of it. This is in Egypt. The owner died and it's not resided, so it became a garbage place for the local people. This is in the Middle East. Somebody created a house almost out of nothing. He collected things from here and there, reused door, reused windows, metal steels, brick from everywhere. Rather than throwing these objects around, he managed to make a house out of it. This is an extension of a dead-end street. This is in Malaysia. This is supposedly an arcade passageway. It was taken over by the adjacent properties. This is a famous housing project. Look how it's, the whole facade is taken. This is in Jeddah. It is forbidden to make a sidewalk because the street is narrow. The guy just made a sidewalk and he planted a tree at night so nobody will see him. People copy from each other. If they saw a solution that works, they copy it from each other. This guy's side wall was hit by a car, so he protected his wall by these steel columns. The next door neighbor did the same, quite fast. Now, to make long story short, what decides responsibility, I claim, is, I argue, it's three claims. Claim of ownership, claim of control, claim of use. If we think of these three claims, we can see them very distinct in the environment. Use, you always see the user in the site. Maybe a seat in the garden is used by the public. We don't say used by John or Henry, by the public. But a seat in your house, it's used by yourself or your wife or your daughter or by the family. So we can always define the using party, and we call it one party. That use is enjoyed always by one party. Now I'm making series of assumptions to develop a model about responsibility. So use is a claim that is enjoyed by a party that we see in the site. Ownership is also a claim that we can know if we ask who is the owner. All we need to do is to ask who is the owner. The owner is one party always. It could be the government, it could be a company, the municipality, the public, an individual. It's one party. The problem is with the control. We often mix control with ownership because the owner always has control. Often we think that control and ownership is the same, but they are not. The mayor controls, but he does not own. The dean of the university, he may have the power to move a partition between two classes to join them to make one class. He controls, but he does not own. That's why observing change, as I started in the beginning, clarify to us who's in control. So these are three claims: ownership, control, use. If we put them in a Venn diagram, we will see that it takes 5 different possibilities. Now, if you are Popperian, you know Karl Popper, his book Conjecture and Repetition. You can easily refute my argument by saying, no, we don't think, Jamil, that these 3 claims are what decides responsibility. There is 4th claim, and you will help me in this if you find one, or say only 2 claims. So that's easy target for you. Now, the first possibility when we put these 3 claims is this one. One party owns, control, and use. And I called it the unified form of submission. In the beginning, I called it the paragon form of submission. They advised me that to change the name, not to be cultural, to be universal. A good example of that is your pen, your house, The extreme opposite of that is this one. It is the dispersed form of submission. One party owns, one party controls, one party uses. 3 parties. What do you expect here if you have 3 parties enjoying one object? There is bureaucracy. There is a lot of give and take and discussions, and we expect the property to change much slower. A good example for this is maybe the church, the mosque, and so on. It's owned by God, controlled by the agent or trustee, or used by the public. So it's bureaucratic somehow. And its condition, it won't be as good as this one. The third possibility is the permissive, which is also quite common, in which one party controls and owns, another party uses only, like a rented house.
Yes. Excellent.
Rented house.
Okay.
In the rented house, the renter only uses the space, but he does not control, he does not own. And there is so many objects like this in the built environment. The fourth possibility is possessive form. Now I call this permissive because the owner permitted others to use his property. This is possessive, in which one party owns, another party controls and uses. And it's more rare in the built environment than the permissive. A good example, those people who sell things in the street. They take a space, they control the space, they use it, but they don't own it. And this is one of the patterns in which I think led to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, this one. It's very interesting if one looks at the property laws throughout history and how it's changing. Because in the traditional environment, up to the last 150 years, 200 years of the Ottoman Empire, the people own their own properties, so they are interested in it, so they produced more goods, and the taxes that you take, the little tax is quite huge. But then, when the government needed more money to sustain bigger army, what happened? They said, well, you revived the land, or you owned the land without the permission of the state, the Sultan. It is the ownership of the government, so we have to put more taxes on you. So the people lost interest in producing more goods. The income decreased, so they didn't have much money to support the army. And if you remember that famous book by Paul Kennedy, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, where he argues when the military machine becomes bigger and consumes more income from the society's income, it will fall. Now this is the last or the fifth form of submission. I call them form of submission. Why? Because the objects and the spaces are, whether they like it or not, they are under the submission of those parties dealing with them. They have no choice because they are not humans. They are spaces, they are objects. They are submitting their condition to the society's individual. And I forgot to explain this. Usually when I start the lecture, I say, let's imagine that the built environment talks. What it will say? The chair will say, if it's in a hotel, these guests are having their child jumping on me, soon I will die. They don't say he's black or white, human. They say he's jumping. I don't want to die. Take care of me. A street will say, well, the municipality decided to close the street from such to such time. Pedestrians are much less now, and gradually I might lose. By the way, I was in Venice yesterday, and I was shocked by how some buildings are deteriorating. Some buildings are deteriorating, and I think the reason is there is maybe some kind of legislation makes it difficult for restoration preservation reasons to take care of them.
Where, sorry?
In Venice. So objects, if they talk, they always tell you about how they are treated. That's why I called it forms of submission. Now here, the trusteeship form of submission, where, and it's a very unusual situation, and it's always temporarily, that one party controls, other party uses and owns. A good example is an orphan. If he inherited a property, he doesn't own control because he's young, by law. a property that's taken by banks as a guarantee for something, someday the bank will lose control and it goes back to the owner. So this is often temporarily. Now this is the logical way of looking at the environment. What happened? Do we have long time or can we?
Yes.
No problem. Okay. What happened that in the traditional environment, most elements, if not all elements, were in this form of submission. The people own, control, use. Even the streets, I'll explain now how. In our contemporary environment, almost everything in this. You rarely find a pure element in this condition, except maybe your glasses, your clothes, but almost everything in this situation. Through the municipality rules. For example, in your property, if you want to build a house, the facade of the house is not your decision. You and the municipality makes one party. Let's take an apartment building, for example. The ceiling between two neighbors up and down, if the housing project is owned by the state, the owner, some kind of manager is managing this ceiling wall, the two neighbors are together using it. So the difficulty of, let's see some slides, then I'll go back to this issue to explain the condition of the object. This is in Dhaka, Bangladesh. I was there in 1985, and it's in some areas it's really chaotic. But when you see this boat, I was planning to take it, the guy said, take your shoes off, because this is his own property. He doesn't want the boat to be spoiled. This is the same city, guy urinating in the street, but nobody can say anything, because the people has no control, and the authority that's supposed to control is not there. And that what happened in the first video I showed you of the wagon that fall down, that the people supposed to control, they have no control by the law. But the people who support to control are not there, because they don't have the power. Simply because they cannot do it, because they're so small, so little, and the environment is so large. So as if there is no at all control, it becomes chaotic. Once I was sitting with somebody, he's saying, look at the environment in this area, it's chaotic and so on. I said, it has no control. Because immediately, if it's not planned, the people think because it's not planned, it's bad. No, it's not a matter of planning, it's a matter of control. In the same country, this is in Dhaka, in a village, where the people control. Amazingly how clean it is, the street. This is an example of a contract to repaint the manhole cover, and he just do it quickly with the largest possible brush, but he just has to finish. But if you do it in your house, you do it differently. You take it out, you clean it. These guys took the permission from the owner of the land to make a football area. Usually they don't work hard, but they worked hard here because it is a play game for them, play area for them. This in Afghanistan. Now introduce new issue. Look, every single centimeter is utilized, but it looks terrible. Why? Because they are poor. I'll explain this tomorrow. When we see traditional environment in poor state, it's not a matter of control or planning, it's a matter of poverty. Those people did not have access to resources, they are poor, and what we see, this is the best possible solution for them. Now, let me ask a question. I said that the unified form of submission will give us much better quality environment than the dispersed form of submission. Imagine that there is one person who lives in a property, let's say she is very nice looking nurse. Usually nurses are very neat, very clean and so on. And she is in rich country. Okay? This nurse, she doesn't own, she doesn't control, she only lives. She's in an apartment, there is another apartment owned by 10 guys, used by them, controlled by them. It is in the unified form. So 10 guys, and they are terrible. They don't open the door, they shoot the door. Okay? They just throw everything everywhere. They don't wash their dishes. Imagine how bad it is. They are. Okay? Now we have 10 people living in one apartment in the unified form. They own it, control it, use it. And we have the same apartment above it for one lady, very clean, very neat, which is in better condition after 5 years. For sure, it's the lady's apartment, although it is in the dispersed form. But that in the unified form, it's terrible, right? I'm not saying, and that's important, I'm not saying that properties will always be in better condition here or there. What I'm saying, and this is the strength of the model, if we push any property in the unified, it will be much better. So we cannot compare properties. We compare the property with itself only. And this is important. So what I'm saying that this lady in this nice apartment, although she doesn't own and control, if she owns and controls the property, will be much better. And those 10 guys who are living terribly, if they don't own and don't control, that apartment will be really, really miserable place to live. Okay? So if you like, what I'm saying, the more we push properties to the unified form, the more it is to be much better. However, there is some objects you cannot put it, we cannot place it in the unified form. They have to be to some extent in the dispersed form, like hospitals, schools. In the Mediterranean city, this was always as trusteeship. They call it Waqf institution. Although it's in the trusteeship form of submission or in the dispersed form of submission, it has less bureaucracy than a bureaucracy by the government, because still it's in the hands of the people around it, although it's in the dispersed form. This is from Spain. Very neat, very clean entrance in the unified form. This is again Saudi Arabia, very neat. Property will come here. And this is very well built housing project in Morocco. Now it looks terrible because it's not in the unified form, although they spent so much money building it. And this one, to the contrary, it's in the unified form, although it looks terrible. Why? Because the people are poor, very, very poor. I visited a site in Morocco I really loved, they call it Mexique, like squatter settlement, they call it in Turkey, Kojagunda, they call it. They have names in every country. Sure you know these names. You see, they utilized garbage to make dwellings. Imagine how much effort went there to make such environments. Imagine what they will do if they were richer. But unfortunately, we planners, we see these areas and we say, let's demolish them and make new towns. Okay, we demolish them. Where do those people go? Okay, we make new towns for them. From where the money comes? From taxing other people. In the process, there is so much money lost in the bureaucracy in between. So it gets worse and worse. And just imagine this entrance. He collected all types of small tiles from everywhere and he made a piece that he likes. And this is one of the most clean house I visited, this one, although they are very, very poor. This is the reception area. This is the water well. This is the entrance. This is in, forgot, Malaysia or Jakarta, forgot. This is, I think, in India, housing project owned by the state, although it's well built, it looks terrible now. This is in Egypt, and the collective, the community space between them is not in a very good condition. This guy created a house out of nothing. This is a good example, that's why I put it in the cover of my Arabic book. Out of garbage, he made a house. And these guys take the oil barrel, they flatten them and they make walls out of them, and gradually they improve. Rather than paying rent, they're improving themselves. Here you see it was like this, now he has a wall, that's the old house, he has a car outside. This is 20 years earlier, this picture. And here this is the original house, first room, second room, third room, first room, second room, third room is growing. And when they do that, when they build, they start with the room, they say, no, the next room will be there, the toilet will be there, the kitchen will be there, and he's continuously experiencing the site. His friends visit him, why do you put the reception room here? Why not there? No, because of the climate, because of this, because of that. They're experiencing the site, they're living the site, they're making dialogue about the site. And gradually, we have convention that I will explain later. Design convention, the patterns, whatever. This is from Egypt, again, collecting local materials from remains of other buildings to make a house. They made 6-story building out of nothing. They tend to reuse the objects. This is in Afghanistan, the box of the weapons are used as a window, and this is waiting to be sold, to be used as a door. This is in Bangladesh, they use a cloth, curtains as shades. And look at this, it is like a piece of art. Now this guy learned more, his condition is a bit better, he can buy tiles, remain tiles from here and there, but not collect them from garbage, but he managed to do something interesting. This is the first stage, he found new materials. Second stage, the third stage is waiting here to be used somewhere else. By the way, I'll give you a link that has 1,000 pictures and slides of all these of the Arabic book. Now, if you remember, I talked about the unified form of submission. To have more objects in the unified form of submission, we need a spring for that. You know the spring of water? Water comes. We need spring in the society, in the built environment, that we will have more objects in the unified form of submission. And this is important. Why? I'll explain this tomorrow more. In our capitalist societies everywhere, much activities are dependent on monopolization, monopolizing the resources. You cannot start from zero. No way. You have to have something. You have to have a degree in the university. You cannot go to the university without finance. You cannot have permission to a project, a factory, whatever, without permission from the authority. You are always tied. So there is a spring, I'll explain now, for the unified form, which is land revivification. There is a tradition or saying by the Prophet that people are God's people, land is God's land. Anybody has the right to revive a land that is not owned by others. Thus, if a land has no traces of being utilized, it is called dead land. You work on it, you make it alive, then you own it. So the source of ownership in Islam begins with work. Work in dead land brings ownership. Then you can sell this property if you work as developer or whatever. So there is a spring in which the unified form of submission comes. Now, look what happened. Because now these days you cannot revive land, you have to buy land. Where does the land come from? From the state. The state give it to institutions, to individual, prominent individuals, whatever. Then they sell it, they divide it and they sell it. That is the system in the Middle East. So in a place like Saudi Arabia or a desert, everywhere, the land has so much value. You buy land for 100,000 euro, 400 square meter, if it's not in this strategic location, if it's outside. Imagine I say you cannot breathe air without my permission. What happens? He may work for me to can the air, then you take it. Although it's so much. The air had value because it was regulated. The same happened with land. When it became precious, and then when the city grew bigger and bigger, agricultural land became within the city. And the owners cannot sell it because the law says you cannot sell the land because it's agricultural land. What does he do? He kills the plants so the land will look terrible. Then they say, okay, now we can make it a project. And this is a good example of dead trees. You see how it's expanding? He will kill these trees because selling the land as a plot for housing more profitable than selling potatoes and tomatoes, of course. Because there is land revivification is bundled with rights. When you revive a land, you cannot revive any land. There is some rights for that land and the other people's land. The reviver cannot revive the right of path of others. And when one revives a land, he will gain, because he revived land, some rights, some property rights. The right of passage to that land, the right of discharging water from the land, the right of bringing water to the land, and so on. So in this case, this shows a quick diagram, the first stage of a settlement, where these are the first dwellers. They can go maybe to center here, factory or water well, whatever. So they walk. All these walkways is their rights. The second stage here, so the first stage became here black, the second stage that is white. The people who come in the second stage, they have to respect the decisions of the people who came in the first stage. Then this is the third stage, where alleyways start to appear, dead-end streets start to appear, and so on. I cannot explain this process, but it's long, but it shows you how the society managed to solve its problems through negotiations, through agreements. So there is something called possessing rights. So each property could be different than the other in terms of its rights. If I came earlier and I opened a shop to the street, the next guy may not be able to open a shop because I'll say your shop will damage my house. Then he has to argue with me if he wants to open a shop. Maybe he pay me, maybe he something. Anyhow, it's a long story. So each property, and this is amazing, will have its different property rights. But if we look at the traditional environment, we see buildings resemble each other. Why is that? Although they have different rights. I'll explain this later. What's even more interesting, and this is difficult to accept by many, is it is a method of controlling the built environment without municipalities, without professionals. Self-administered environment. So we are saving the money that we're spending on those people sitting in the offices telling us what to do. But I'll explain this tomorrow. This requires a new role for the planner and the architect. I'm not saying we don't need them. No, we need them, but with different role. They will work for the people, not for the government. Now the architect, usually when you design a house, you go to the architect and the architect listens or obeys the request of the owner. The planners don't do that. We need a role for the planners who have much wisdom and knowledge of planning to work for the people, not for the state. And I'll explain this tomorrow if somebody asks about this. So for example, when the people revive, nodes like this is water center where people collect water, is respected, nobody can revive it. Here, the center of the town, also respected, nobody can revive it. Places where they sell goods, respected, not revived by others. Here there is the traces of walkways where people can walk in and out. It's also demarcated so nobody can revive that. You see here the traces of people walking, again here, here. Another examples, well defined, from gradually from ill-defined to a well-defined walkways. What does this mean? It means that the streets are created by the people's vote. When you vote, you elect a person, you vote in the voting battle. Here they do it, but on the site. When I walk in this direction to my property, somebody else, if he walks in the same way or another way, the third comes and he selects one of both. Gradually, the streets will emerge. And the people usually select the best road for their cars, camels, whatever. So roads comes first. Then properties define the roads. So it's exactly the opposite process of ours today. Now planners, they make the roads in the office, then they have to make bridges, they have to cut the mountain and so on. Now, I'll explain few principles about controlling the street. The first principle, for example, in major streets where you have so many passers-by, nobody can add anything to the street without the permission of everyone. But how do you bring everybody to agree? It's impossible. So they made the principle that anybody's objection is considered the objection of everybody. Imagine that I go to Venice yesterday and they say, oh, I don't like this, you have to remove it. I cannot do that, impossible. Who's me to do that? Here, in the traditional city, you can't do that. If somebody tried to build anything on the street, plant a tree, even if it's beneficiary for everybody, the principle is not it's beneficiary or no, the principle is objection. A street that has heavy passers-by, anybody's objection is everybody's objection. So we expect such streets to change very difficultly. But how it reached this level of being difficult to change, it went through a process that brought it to its perfect size almost. For example, here, maybe there is an important building here and the people passing by, like the slide I showed you from Venice in the beginning. Somebody took part of the street. And he may do it gradually by building, having a shed here. Nobody objected. Then he built one brick here. Nobody objected. Gradually, that means the street is wide enough for his action. So in the streets that are not very heavily used, they don't go to the principle of objection. They go to another principle, the principle of damage. They look at the, if somebody objected, they look at the action. Is it damaging to the public or no? And gradually the society produced methods to discover the damage. In a dead-end street, the owners of the street, it's considered the owners of the street who own and control should agree all on the action. The principle of damage does not hold. If they accepted all a damaging act, that is their business, as if somebody did something damaging for himself inside his house. So there is certain principles that ultimately will generate higher quality environment by bringing together the experiences of the people living in the site. So their knowledge is going up and up and up through conventions. Here is examples of establishing rights. Nobody will look at the staircase. It was first. It is on the street. It has the right to exist. Here, children playing here, nobody can revive this. A square, a passageway. For example, here, these 3 palm trees, somebody planted them. That's it. That's his within public space. So you can see all kinds of overlap of patterns that exist. Now we don't have this richness. It's public streets for the authority, you cannot touch it, or your private property. The usage of the space, children using the space, so that is taboo area, cannot be revived. This is sitting space outside. Now if you remember in the beginning I showed you some slides where people take part of the street. That's considered in the legal system the right of control of the property owner. If this is my property, the space outside my property in the public domain, so when the people revive slides, they will try to make the streets much wider. That would accommodate their own usage outside plus the passers-by. Now that is not considered. This is the FINA. All these examples of the FINA that the people leave for their future usage. And this is in a village revived by the people. The width of the street is 80 meters. I told the guy, what is this? Do you think it will be like the Champs-Élysées one of these days? He said, why not? So with the image in the planner's head is that if we allow people to do whatever they want, they will squeeze the environment, they will make narrow streets. That's not true. They are doing that now, because they are poor. And they select a site that is not really well observed by the authority, and they squeeze themselves in it. But if the system of reunification is enacted, they will have playgrounds, they will have their own football yards, on parking spaces for 5-6 cars. They will utilize the land for their own contemporary needs in a way that they like. And it will become higher quality environment. Somebody asked me, I said, what happens if somebody comes and hires 100 people and built a palace? I said, this will not happen. Because when we open access of resources to the people will become closer in their income. And it is difficult for them to hire hundreds of people to work for them. Now in the capitalist system we have always unemployed people to be absorbed by investors. In that case, if you ask me, because I'm not employed, I can work anywhere, if you ask me to work for me in my company, my factory, I say no, I'll open another factory next to you. That's why when they are closer in the income, I'll explain this tomorrow, people will not be able to hire other revive 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. That's possible today because there is poor people who cannot find jobs, who will be hired by rich people. So we have these classes now. Tomorrow I'll talk about this. So that's why now they revive, they take bigger. Very well defined spaces, nobody can add to them. And gradually the streets will follow the topography and we'll have natural solutions that respects topography. Now the principle of damage is very important one, I think not only in the traditional environment but in all our environment, even in our contemporary environment. If you look at the planning laws and so on, it all directs itself to one target, eliminating damage for others, for the public, for the environment. But when they make the laws and the rules, it's freezed, it cannot be changed, which might create another damage. Here, for example, and somebody asked me, I said, where is the examples? You don't have examples. You show us camels and donkeys and narrow streets. I say, I don't have examples because it was not implemented. If we implement those systems that gives the people the power, then you will see the examples. But now I don't have examples, what can I do? Now here is the principle of damage. An overpass, it can be done by the people, if it does not damage others. I'll go very fast on this. Here you see this guy opened the window that will overlook this property. The owner of this objected, so the solution was to screen part of the window. This is amazing, a factory inside the city next to the authority that should prevent environmental damage, and they cannot do anything because the owner is powerful. I used to live there. A factory that damaged the whole area, but nobody can do anything simply because the owner is powerful. And the people, the local people, don't have power. This is from Tunis. As you see, windows try to avoid each other because privacy considered something really damaging, as windows that don't see others. Let me give this example to explain the principle of damage. There was a house, and the house owner brought donkeys, horses as a stable to his house. They started to hit the wall that damaged the neighbor. The objected neighbor went to the judge. The judge sent someone to check. So the judge, they discovered a damage. The judge did not tell him to take the horses out. He told him, and this is important, stop the damage. Stop the damage. Imagine now somebody builds a factory. He does not have to follow the rules of anybody to build the factory. He just built the factory. But he knows very well that if he damages the environment or the people, they will stop him. From the beginning, he will initiate a factory that will not damage. This is how we control pollution, climate change, I think, in the built environment. by giving the people the power around the factory, the right to stop. But if you give it to the municipalities, to the rulers, to whatever, it will not stop. It will continue. And from the beginning, they will create a factory that might damage the environment, like in India, in China, and so on, because you can corrupt officials. But if the people have the power and they can stop the damage, nobody will think of creating a factory that will damage. So the industry of making factories will be pushed toward creating new equipments that will not produce pollution when it operates. And this is a good example. They ask him to eliminate the damage. Of course, it's a simple example. So what he did, this guy, the only solution was to build a wall 1 person's height under the ground and dig the ground, so when the horse kicks the wall, the vibration goes like that. So it's very far. So the damage is eliminated. And they invented a method to discover the damage. They brought piece of paper, they put some seeds, and they connected the paper for 4 corners. The horse is hitting the wall, and then the seeds are not moving. So they have their own method of discovering damage. Now we need new methods of discovering damage from factories, but the control in the hands of the people. One can always corrupt the officials, but we can never corrupt the people in the site, because they will be damaged. Nobody will accept damage if you pay him money. I'll become sick. What are you talking about? You want to corrupt me? I'll become sick. I will not accept. And this is important. I'm going very slow, so I'll go very fast now. The same principle of damage can be held between collectively owned properties, individual owned properties, and so on. The same goes for accessibility. Because of this incremental growth of ownership that might cause some problems of accessibility between properties. They managed to solve that. As you can see here, there is very well clear inventions of finding solutions for accessibility. I have to go fast. This whole concept of creating a society by the people, and people solve their problems together, and that they should share responsibility together, created a society where the territorial structure is quite deep. What does this mean? Now, when we walked from outside, we came from public space to semi-public. Let's say this is a room. Okay, so all these public spaces are quite public, although we have hierarchy of spaces. Take a housing project in, let's say, a communist state or socialist state where the government owns the passageways, the elevators, everything. So we have 2 levels of territories. The public all the way to your house door. And John Habrakan, I recommend you to read this book, The Structure of the Ordinary, where he explains the territorial depth. So the more people have power, the more we can see territorial depth. And usually people, when they have their own territories, they'd like to define that territories by establishing, let's say, a gate, like the gate of the house, the door of the house. If they collectively own the space outside, they make a gate for that space outside. I saw an interesting case in London where there is public space, big square. In the center there is a garden that fenced with a gate, with a key. So the people living around, or some people, has the right to use that garden, no one else. So if one look at the different societies and how it's created while it is growing within the territorial structure, it is really interesting exercise. And if a graduate student would like to see how it works in different cultures, that will be very, very good thesis. It needs work. Anyhow, so the territorial structure that in the Middle Eastern city was properties have collective space here, and these together has, like this B1 has collective space, and these groups has a collective space. Not necessarily demarcated by walls, no, in terms of responsibility. They own it, control it, use it. And it was well defined by these gates. It says this is the sharp line between inside and outside, and that's why it is very well decorated. Gates of cities, gates of houses, gates of quarters. But this is much different than the gated communities these days. You see here, gated community, rich, poor, gated community, rich, poor. Gated communities these days does not indicate responsibility. They indicate class relationship. We are richer, we don't want to live like you because we are scared of you, you are criminals, I want to live peacefully in a place where I feel secure. I need a gated community. That's why gated communities for me are not healthy sign. They are a sign of capitalism being so ignited. Although they are solution. They are solution for our circumstances now. But in the traditional environment, although there is gates, but people are quite similar in their come and their products is quite similar. So gates separates peoples in terms of responsibility, not in terms of wealth distribution. So there is large gates, gates of villages. You can see the gates clearly. This is the same site in Tangier. I went to it to see how it looks in terms of change. You can see the gate here. There's the gate there. There's a gate here. Sometimes we don't see the gates these days because it was demolished by the authority. In Harvard University, I looked at the description of Egypt to see the drawing of Cairo when Napoleon came to Egypt. And it was amazing for them when they drew Cairo. It's all built area. There is no streets. There is streets, but there is a gate. When you open the gate, there is another gate. You open the gate, there is another gate. So it's series of the streets that demarcates the territorial structure. But then the authorities all over, they demolish the gates because they don't want the gates. Gates means people are free and they can decide what's inside. So I went to Tunis to look at the traces of the gates and I found them. There is no gates, but their traces, like this. Sometimes you see the gate here. This is in Asila in Morocco, where you see outside it's quite not as clean as inside. You go inside here, this is living space between 3-4 buildings. It's very clean, very neat. So when the people share responsibility, they know this is their own. See what's happening here. Very clean. This is Morocco. Even they clean. This is in Jordan. They clean the street. This is in Morocco. The ladies clean the street collectively. Now I said, imagine that our city is composed of streets or public spaces owned by the people. How much does we save in its maintenance? Somebody said, but look at Sweden. The people don't litter the street and it's very clean. I said, okay, what is the percentage of public spaces, let's say, of the built environment. Let's say it is 60%. If we reduce that to 40%, how much do we save? Although it's clean, but we saved. So the more the people own and they shoulder responsibility, the less the cost of maintaining the city. Now, when we give the people the power to decide, why is it that in the traditional environment we see buildings, although they are free, there is no rules, regulations, they are free to decide, we see the same solution is repeated. Similar facades, similar floor plans, and so on. Why is that? As you can see here, there is a very well developed convention here in Jeddah. The whole city in central Jeddah is like this. Although in Jeddah there is no wood, there is no trees. They import woods from India at that time. They imported woods from India at that time. Afghanistan, Riyadh, Bahrain, Northern Africa, the very well developed convention in dressing clothes. Not only the facades or the floor plans. This is an interesting example. I was sent by the Khan Award to southern Morocco to see a valley called Dera Valley, where they have something called Ksur, a big village with one fence, one high wall, like a castle. And it's interesting how poor they are and how sophisticated is their environmental solutions. This is it. And if you look at this decoration and how the ladies can move in the roofs and how can they control the light with these mats inside their dwellings, ladies can walk here. It's fascinating environment, because outside is sunny and they're working in the sun always. They want to have some shaded area. The ceiling water spout. How did it come? Those conventions. People usually, if they are free, they want to invent. They try anything. Sometimes very stupid solutions. If we have that stupid solution in the site, everybody see that it is stupid, nobody will repeat it. But if we have a planning decision that is stupid, when it's implemented, disaster, it's too late to correct it because it's larger scale. But if it's in the site, it is smaller scale and we can see it. These are examples. Somebody used ceramic in his facade. Nobody liked it. It did not become conventional. Somebody used aluminum foil for cooking behind the glass to maybe isolate the heat from sun rays. It didn't work out. Somebody used a wallpaper that's of inside in the outside. Of course it doesn't work, so nobody repeat that. In A Street, a column of the public that somebody built around it, because this is my property and this is a sign of contradiction. If the built environment is filled with signs of contradictory laws. Sometimes we see them, sometimes we don't see them. Here it's very clear because this is the column and this guy has the right to extend his cantilever 1 meter. So why he doesn't take it? He just take it. Now look at this one example, one unit. Small gypsum block. It was used differently by different people in different locations. Gradually, one solution will hit. People will like it, they will copy it, it will become convention. I know I saw this builder in Morocco, in Isrir, and how he transmits the people's trial and error into drawings, then he makes buildings. So he is the agent of transmitting local solutions of the people to a reality. This is a trial and error again of this shade over a street. Different solutions. This is cloth, wood, another type of wood. Show you just one example. Trees. Okay? Someone will hit the right solution. Then it becomes a convention. Then at the end, those conventions, we see it in fascinating traditional environments that we all like. So the origin of these inventions is the people's trial and error. Stop here, thank you. If we have
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. If there are comments or questions or whatever, please.
Thank you very much. It's really, really amazing discussion here, presentation. I think really interesting to see that the patterns of responsibility are somehow related to the various conventions that exist in the built environment that you described just now in the last few minutes are something that is built by trial and error. But like the result is a certain convention, a certain, I wouldn't say rule, but a convention that people use. And there are different places with different conventions. For example, the convention of using the area outside your building is really accepted in the Middle East, but it's not accepted elsewhere. For example, in Europe, you wouldn't. So what do you think is the importance of these conventions? How important it is that there are conventions, that people agree on them, and that they are, in a way, enabling the pattern of responsibility. Is it important to have the conventions, or is it just, I don't know, a curious thing that is, how do you see this convention?
Okay, let me explain it this way.
Okay.
The Soviet Union, when it was powerful, they used to take in the Olympics, the golden and silver medals,
Yeah.
and they sent somebody to outer space.
Yeah.
Because they pulled the resources to target this, while the society is being destroyed from inside gradually because the economy is bad. While the United States is a different situation because you have to finance yourself to become an Olympiad.
Yeah.
Different system.
Yeah, exactly.
We can have, if we put this example in practice, we can have very good environment like they did in the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh, for example. They built very nice setting. Everybody likes. How much did it consume from the society to build that space? Like what happened with the Olympiad in the Soviet Union. It took from the society's resources. What I'm saying that if the built environment was created by people's participation through conventions, the whole society will do fine. So when we see a site that is doing very well, of course you can design an environment that performs much better than people's convention. The question, how much does it cost? So convention is a tool of providing better solutions with less cost. And that's why I think it is important. And that's why I think planners don't see this point, because they are operating within a capitalist system. You have this budget that we pull this money from the people, we have this budget. Give us, there is a guy, Bent Freiberg, He's very well known. He talks about this, and he says how do planning decisions are not rational, but that planners rationalize their decisions. Okay, we rationalized their decisions for this site, and we built a very good project. How much did it cost from other sites? And this is what I'm worried about. This is what I care about.
Yeah.
Justice. Justice. The term justice is not really in the planning discipline much. So their task is to make a city work fine, and they succeeded in that. But do we need that? Do we need cities like major cities, huge cities, that is centralized like the capitals, where people do nothing, they produce nothing, they just produce paperwork, bureaucracy? When I'm coming from Venice to here, the whole in the train, this is not criticism for Italy, all over. The people who are producing are not in the cities, they're outside. All factories, warehouses and so on.
Agriculture, yeah.
Agriculture, factories.
Yeah.
They're outside the city. But who's living fine and doing everything fine and enjoying everything? The people in the city. Why?
People like us. Yeah.
People like me. I do nothing, I just sell talk.
Yeah.
Right? We don't produce much, but we live well on the expense of those people. And this is a problem. This is unjust. Of course, you can have very good city working fine. On the expense of what? This example I always give to the students. We like the pyramids. How many Jews were killed building those pyramids? We may like some fancy buildings in Europe, huge castle for Nobel who slaved so many people. Is that just? I think we have to bring the question of justice to the built environment. How much was spent in terms of manpower to build that statue or to build that building? Is that just? This is what I worry about. That was a good question.
Yes.
I appreciate your marvelous presentation. Thank you very much. And I wanted to talk about the different forms of submission that you articulated. And actually, we have seen these three aspects: ownership, control, and use. And for me, identically, I think that these using is somehow different from ownership and control. You also said something about this, and I think that power is
yes.
about control and ownership, not about using. But you made a nice example about what happened in Islamic traditional cities, that using could lead to ownership. But this doesn't happen in the modern cities, in the contemporary cities. Do you think if it is because of misunderstanding of using? I mean, are we really using this space, or we are only consuming? I mean, is it different between using this space and consuming this space?
Yes, interesting question. Now, there is resources for power. A powerful person or power holder does not become powerful simply out of in here. Money brings power. A position brings power. Inheritance brings power. A king's son becomes a king, or Bush's son became George Bush, and so on. Okay? And there is wealth. The more you make money, the powerful you are. But in reality, or logically, you make more money if there is monopolization. If there is no monopolization, you cannot get more. What I'm saying is that the powerful institutions or people, our existing system created them. We need systems that eliminate, and tomorrow I'll talk about this because this subject much related to sustainability. in which I argue that within our current system we can never solve sustainability. The climate change is proceeding, no matter what. Of course, there is research here and there, technical research. We are not short of technical solutions for our sustainable problem. We are short of methods of implementing those solutions on wider scale. And that's political question, that's not technical question. Now, I go back to your point, is that ownership and control brings power. That's true. That's true. But if we manage to dismantle the resources of power, then we can see clearly these two. Now, we don't see them clearly because our society now, the capitalist society, often bring them together. Because the rules are tailored to serve the powerful. In the legal system in the Middle East, you have rights. You have rights by the society given to you. From those rights, you steal power. Now the powerful tailor and make the rights the opposite. And there is interesting thesis about that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
The examples that you have shown are very good for a small change, for adding a room or adding one unit house. But when it comes to modern life where there's massive immigration, or even just a village that is growing very fast, and then suddenly there's a neighborhood that you have shown, and there all of it is built, and there's another generation coming. You need 10 more houses for the next 2 years. Change is becoming very fast, and can this pattern also
work? This question is always raised. Wherever I go, there is this question. The first question is raised usually. Your model works for a small community, doesn't work for the answer is as follows. Now, in the traditional environment, in the past environments, life was very complicated. If you make a piece of bread, you have to grain the seeds, and then you have to make it, then you have to cook it, and so on. If you want to eat meat, you have to slaughter, and then you have... It was a very difficult life. But our relationship was very simple. There is no relationship except with the neighbors and so on. So relationships were very simple, life was very difficult. Nowadays the opposite. Life is very simple. You go to the supermarket, you take one week's food in one trip. But our relationship is very difficult. You have so many numbers, number for the SIM card, number for the passageway to the entrance of the building, the car has a number. If you have relationship with the dean, with the faculty, with friends, very complicated. It is in our head, therefore, that complicated relationships produce simple life. And I think it's the opposite. What we need is a simple relationship that produces sophisticated life, like ours today. We want to live like how we're living now, with cars, with mobiles, and so on, with simple relationships. I'll explain this tomorrow. We can do that if the pattern of production changed. Now, give me a chance for tomorrow, and ask this question tomorrow.
Okay.
But to make it
today and tomorrow, because otherwise we'll discuss about everything.
No.
I just have
In one statement, our factories today is owned by the people who do not work on it.
Yeah.
If we use this system where you have access to resource for all, factories will be owned by the people who work on it. Then conventions are needed to coordinate between those producers. I'll explain this tomorrow, inshallah.
What if a loaner withdraws from his responsibility over his property? For instance, we have some issues here in Italy, that we have many underused buildings in several parts of the country, sometimes in these very small towns which are depopulated, but even in big cities as Milan. So in this case, I understand that on one side we need to accomplish to the fact that of property rights do also enable you to whether to use or not use your property. But at the same time, the responsibility becomes, to me, very important in this case. And what happens in this case, in your opinion?
Yeah, what you call, this is often happens with absentee ownership, where one owner owns hundreds of properties. And it's not in the unified form of submission because he's not there. He's not owning. He's owning legally, but he's not living in the site. So he's far away. What makes it worse, maybe there is rules and regulations makes it difficult for him to invest in the property. In Egypt, for example, I studied this, and that is in the Arabic book in the second chapter. I studied the laws of renting apartments in Egypt. What happened at that time in the 50s, Egypt went to a socialist flavors ruling. And usually they stand by the user, by the tenant. So they created rules and regulations to help the tenant. What happened? The owner lost interest. So he neglected the building. Not only that, he stopped maintaining, hoping that the tenant someday will leave. So rules were created to force the owner to act. But he doesn't want to act because he lost interest. This will not happen if the people, the owners, were free without rules and regulations, although they're absent because this is their property. They should take care of it. And in one chapter of the book, I discuss this subject. I didn't talk about it here. The relationship between subdividing a property and pulling them together to make one property. In the tradition, tomorrow maybe I'll talk about this fast. It's very, very interesting how, if you have, especially in the compact cities, how the boundaries between property moves. Because people can sell part of their properties to mixed property. Which means that the size of the property is always best with the size of the party who owns. Let me give an example. A child can own a quarter, a community, big community, a quarter of a city. That's possible. He won't be interested. And this is the wrong relationship between the two sizes. 10 people can own a shop. Exactly the opposite. Major problems could happen between them. That's why I showed the examples, the lady, the nurse, and the... So there is always a proper size for the property, proper size for the party. If this is not balanced, and this will always be balanced, but not now, after generations, because if you implement a system, you don't see the consequences of the system immediately. It takes generations. So if doors were opened for people, for resources, as I'll explain tomorrow, this owner who is absentee and he has so many properties, he will be forced to sell them because he cannot take care of them, all of them. After his death, it will be distributed and so on and so forth. So properties will come to the right size of the party. Then it will flourish. But this is a very, very good question.
I have just like a comment, not a question, but when you say the principle of whoever revive a place or a land, he own it, then I think it's the same principle. Whoever who neglects the land who have revived it, he will lose the ownership of this land. So it's like dynamic solution, and people could learn from it. Maybe he failed in reviving the land, so the other one will try to revive the same land in other principle or in other ways. So it's like way of the community learn from the experience of each other.
Yes, that's right. People, when they revive and then they don't sell it, and they leave it, it will go back as for others to revive. There is different legal opinions in this subject. Some schools of law say if you neglected a land that you revived, you lose it. Like you took from the river water, you didn't have the right to put it back. Some say no, as long as you put some effort there, there is water well, there is a house and so on, if you want to make a farm, you should not lose it. Although there is differences, but the main issue, I mean, the general picture, that people act, are allowed to act. Now people are not allowed to act, and this is my major point, without going into much details about the Islamic legal system and so on. And I think if the Western culture want to look at the traditional wisdom, not only in the Middle East, everywhere, that's why I stressed that what happens if the built environment talks, regardless of the users, Chinese, Argentinian, black, white, doesn't make difference. What matters is their basic human tendencies. And because I think it is to some extent the same everywhere, we should learn from the traditional environment everywhere.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, because you are one of the few authors that saved a lot of time in my life, because once I read your work, okay, I can step forward, a big step forward.
Thank you.
Continue thinking, so I take your work and say, okay, I can continue starting from your work. And this, so thank you very much for all your work, and it is quite important for me. And obviously I have many questions to many different kind of issues, but I'll try to go straight to only one point that is connected to the issue of design. As you know, the way in which we teach design to students nowadays is a traditional, modern way.
Yes.
So we teach students to design whatever they like on a city. And according to your work and also other works, we should completely revise the way in which we teach students how to design cities, and also for professionals how to design cities. Because we have in mind that things like responsibility and beauty are things that we can design. We never consider process and time as the main source of beauty and responsibility. So according to your knowledge, in which way you will revise the way in which we teach design to students?
Well, tomorrow I'll talk about design and participation, where I think I'm much influenced by John Habrakan, who invented, I think, who's the first really to talk about design participation in 1960. 61 he wrote his book, Supports, where he argues about professionals making all decisions, as you said it very, very nicely, that beauty, comfort are not the product of centralized decision process, but out of participation. But the problem, users are these days ignorant. They are not knowledgeable like in the past. We don't have conventions. Is it first step a trial to bring conventions into the profession of design? That I'll try to answer tomorrow, and because I have tomorrow too. Tomorrow is about sustainability. The second one is about participation.
Today in the afternoon, if you can, and the other is tomorrow, if you can.
No, let's do it tomorrow. I have to revise the slides and arrange them. Tomorrow, inshallah.
Tomorrow we have time.
Tomorrow I'll show you the slides. But basically, give the people some power. How do we give them that in terms of design? We have to invent a design method to give them the right to decide, because they cannot decide everything. We need a method for that.
Yeah, because nowadays, as you know, we are trying to bring complexity in design, and complexity means try to make people participate into the design process. But the final result that we have is still a design.
Yes.
It's still something that is frozen. It's still the one decision that try to impose a certain shape and form on the built environment. So we have more complexity in the design, but we have already the process, the incremental process in which the traditional city was designed in the past. I don't know if it is clear, but having participatory process means most of the time to include some more knowledge and to have more complex design, but not obviously to create a process that is incremental and similar to the traditional environment.
Maybe if we say incremental decisions and design, they go to some extent against each other. Because incremental decisions means we decide now and we don't know what's the decision tomorrow. And design means, okay, we lay out a layer of decisions in design, but the next stage should be like this. So they may not go with each other. There is a guy called Snuff. He wrote an interesting book where he looked at all the, Henry Snuff, all the design approaches in terms of participation. All the movements like Christopher Alexander, like for example the Site and Services by Caminos, for example, anyhow, in the 60s, 70s, 80s there was major attempts like John F. Turner and so on, tried to bring the concept of people participation. But I think it failed mostly because the larger picture, which is access to resources, are not discussed. Always there is a piece of land, quite well-defined amount of money for specific people to live happily, nicely. How do you do that? And now if you look at these circumstances, it's all constraints. It's all constraints. We need another system that is not constrained with all these bundled regulations and rules. And it's still a challenging question. I don't have an answer. How do you do design? One of the interesting answers is, I think there is an Italian guy who taught at MIT, I forgot his name. He was proposing the building typology as an answer. When I came to Italy, I understood why he was proposing that. Because it was very clear, you have very well defined in Italy building type. When you go into Rome, it's amazing how all the facades has zero margin with the outside, just facade and windows. In some other culture there is inside, outside and so on. I noticed that there is courtyards inside these large buildings. So there is a very well defined type. Maybe the answer, if I look at the Ottoman Empire buildings, they have very well defined type. Maybe the answer is following those types. I always argued, I learned this from John Habrakan, that if you bring a good design, a very well design that allows people to change their environment, whether you put it in Istanbul or Rome, it will work better than an invented design by an architect that is not very good, because people are quite similar in their needs, in their requirements. Nobody will have a bathroom 10 by 10. Everybody is 2 by 3 or 2 by 2. The same goes for reception room and so on and so forth. Everybody wants a peaceful space inside his house, like a balcony, a small court and so on. How can we create buildings that accommodate change? This is a challenging. And the traditional environment, if you look at those monumental buildings, I noticed that in Istanbul, I'll show tomorrow, that they managed to accommodate changes. Because if you look at the floor plan, you see 2-3 types of sizes that repeat themselves in a thematic way. But now when the designer designs a building, if the space is in his pocket, I need a room 4 by 5 for secretary, okay, this is a room. I need a reception hall, okay, this is. Then when you look at the design at the end, if it was an embassy, for example, 20 different sizes of spaces. If you want to reuse this building for another function, you have to demolish 50% of the building. And once in a conference, but I was wrong at that time, they were laughing at me. I said, it was a conference about restoration, preservation. I said, why do we think always about preserving past buildings. Why don't we design something now? The future generations will not demolish it. Why don't we preserve it from now for them? They said, how do you do that? I said, we have to think of a design tool that makes those buildings live much longer with less change. And I learned this from Stanford Anderson, who wrote his book On the Street, where he invented the word of robustness. The word robustness now is used much in urban design studies, which is how do you create an environment that is robust, that accommodates much usage in the future with little change, with little physical change. And this is a challenge. I don't know how to answer this challenge.
You answered to me because you answered with the example of building. So you go to the scale of the building. You didn't consider the scale of the neighborhood, for instance. So you have a clear idea about the problem of design, and the scale of design is the building.
But how do you make people participate in it? In making decisions?
But some people can also answer taking into consideration the neighborhood as a whole, but you answer that the design problem is a building. It's not a large area.
How do you do it when you want to design a site for 30, 40 families? It is a really problem. We don't have design tools. I don't know other than the SAR 73 of John Habrakan that brings the people together and they sit together and they decide this is a parking space, this is a garden for children to play, this is a street, this is the width of the street. And they don't have experience. This is the problem. The people don't have knowledge of. So if you like, with these modern inventions and planning tools, the people lost the environmental knowledge. So we cannot utilize them now to make new environments. We have a problem.
Okay.
And this is a good area for research, I think.
Thank you.
We have a couple of comments to conclude, if there are no other comments. First of all, thank you again very much for your inspiring, challenging and fascinating lecture for me. I have to say that I agree on quite everything, apart a couple of things, just for the sake of discussion, otherwise. The first observation is this one. If I take your perspective seriously, it is impossible to criticize gated communities. You need an external criteria or an external argument. Because gated communities are not rich communities, are simply gated. That is a situation in which use, control and ownership coincide. I can imagine a homeowner association gated with middle-class people or even poor people. So, if we are criticizing rich communities, this is one point, but not gated communities. The second point is that if I consider your argument against orthodox urban planning in favor of giving or allowing more place for people, for trial and error, local knowledge, and so on, it is very similar to the Hayek argument against central economic planning in favor of the market system. It is exactly the same. It is interesting because usually you don't use this in the field of the built environment. But now the problem is why your perspective is so incompatible from your point of view with the market system. Maybe when you say capitalism, you mean something different.
Market or Marxist?
No, market system.
Market.
I mean a situation in which people can own something, produce something, and sell something. This is a situation in which you allow people to do what they like, to have control of ownership of something, to use their local knowledge, to use trial and error, and to interact in time in order to create conventions, some time, or something like that. So, in brief, for me it is not clear why the market system, and I use this term, not capitalism, because I'm not thinking about that, is not compatible with your perspective. Maybe when you say capitalism, you mean a particular form of statalism. That is in favor of certain capitalists, not of the market system. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, it's clear.
But just for the sake of discussion, because I have to say, I agree with everything. So I'm thinking about some critical comment. Otherwise,
Can I?
we all agree. Yes.
Okay. The first comment is right. Gated communities these days. I shouldn't call them gated communities. In this perspective, it's right. But let me argue the other way around. Gated communities these days are often the product of developers. Developer takes a piece of land, they build properties, and he sells it. So those who can afford it can take it. They may not be rich, but they are certain class of people. Because of the financial market, pull them to buy this size of property, and that is their capability. So it brings the people, a sector of the society, to live somewhere together. And that could be a gated community for the poorer people because they bought a less expensive property because the developer did not develop building, rather he developed a piece of land with the infrastructure, and he gave the people the site to build whatever they want. But it still pulled certain class of people together in one place. That's why it is gated, and they decide to build a gate around it. So it always corresponds to a people of similar income and maybe consequently of similar behavior in one place, because the resources of the society is not open for everybody. Tomorrow, if I had a chance to talk about David Harvey, who criticized capitalism, but he never looks at the question of total access to resources, because everything within the capitalist system is owned by someone. But what I'm talking about, that if we opened resources for everybody, the gated community is not the product of people bought certain properties in a site. No. Somebody revive, other revive, third revive gradually, because they share the responsibility of cleaning the area, of bringing electricity, water, and so on. They decide to have it as one community for themselves. So then they make a gate for it, or so whatever. So it's totally different situation. Now, how does that work these days? Becomes an interesting question, because people will say, well, if people gradually, through accumulation of decisions, and it doesn't have to be accumulation of decisions to make a community, this build first, second, no. Maybe a tribe will come, maybe a group of inventors want to make a Silicon Valley, or whatever. They come together and they revive an area for them to live there. So they take it together as one site. Now, how do we provide infrastructure for those sites? What's happening these days that the central authority will give you water, electricity, and so on. What I'm calling for, even those services will be developed by companies. Companies where people work in the companies I'll explain tomorrow. Those people, now let's say we're living in a community, we decide which company serve us in discharging sewage. We will decide maybe one or two companies will supply us with water. And the companies that provide water have to compete to make us happy. We will select the best price, the highest quality for our site. This is accepting today's technology that is centralized. But what I think will happen, that because the people revive their site, they don't want to bring electricity from far away. They will try to produce electricity inside. And then we will have solar energy will be developed, wind energy will be developed. So the solutions will be totally different. Now we are judging a system within our perception of the existing technical solutions. If this implemented, we could have had I always argue the iPhone 5 centuries ago. Why? Because technology will have different path. People we may not have sustainable problems because people will settle in places where there is water, and they cannot damage the environment because they cannot throw water into the rivers, as happened in Europe in before last century, and so on. Because the people in the site of control, then we have different way of providing services now. Maybe the people won't throw their waste into pipes, to huge pipes, to a central place to be treated. They will do it in the site like digesters and so on and so forth. So we'll have different environments. So the whole gated community versus gated community has much its roots in its and with capitalist system or no. What was the second comment?
No, the second comment is connected to this. You already replied. I see your point. Simply, from my point of view, your argument is an argument against centralized capitalism rather than against capitalism. This is the way in which I read this kind of approach.
Maybe
if you say we have to decentralize production, for instance, of energy, this means someone is the owner of something and can produce something. So open access to all is the starting point, I think, not the permanent situation. So once you accept ownership, in my opinion, you accept the market system in some way or the other, without the central state that decides for everyone. So it's the same. I'm simply putting.
It's not capitalism that you're really criticizing. It is
Or a certain form.
On the contrary, it is the community which is granted forces like the state or the city hall or this is the main problem here, that the public is not acting by people, it is acting by their representative, and the representative is suddenly becoming an entity which can control, which can, without ownership, without use. We have the power, we're granting the power in our name for someone to control, and this someone is suddenly taking over the environment.
Yes, exactly. You're right. Exactly, you're right.
Yeah.
The point that I was trying to do tomorrow is that with this system of taxation and somebody making decisions for others, we are creating a layer of people who don't produce except organization, and they are sometimes 30-40% of the society. In some Gulf states, for example, the inhabitants, either he's a football player or a singer or a broadcaster or something, they don't produce. And that putting more labor force on others to produce, to feed those people living lavishly. And that's what I'm trying to fight, is that if everybody produces, we will work less with more enjoyable products because everybody is producing. In that case, we need conventions to organize the environment. So this is to put it in a nutshell.
This is where your taxes go.
Okay, great. Thank you. We will have time tomorrow to go.
I always give this example, remember it, I will always give it to the students. If you ask a university president, would you do better without the government, he'll say yes. If you ask the dean, would you do better without the university organization, he'll say yes. If you ask will you do better, the dean will say yes. If somebody asks you in the unit, will you do better without the dean will say yes.
I agree.
Thank you.